Hello, and welcome to the Professor Podcast with Ruth and Claire. Each episode, we talk about a particular topic in the life of a professor. We are tenure-track faculty members in the sciences, working at a primarily undergraduate university in California. The purpose of our podcast is reflection, so we bring something we think is working and something we're working on to discuss.
Welcome to the Professor Podcast with Ruth and Claire. Hi, I'm Ruth.
And I'm Claire. And today we're going to talk about Headspace. But first, Ruth, how was your week?
My week was pretty good. I'm definitely getting less and less clenched from the semester, so that's good.
Excellent.
Still,
always good.
Yeah, it's always good. And I had like a cool experience because there's a lot of things that are coming up. Like, I mean, not that anything is really good about the pandemic, but I'm hearing like lots of things from people like, oh, I never could have gone to this talk, but I got to do it on Zoom. And so I was able to see this cool person talking, that sort of thing. But I, this week, got to see the National Theatre in England has put up a production of A Streetcar Named Desire that has Gillian Anderson in it. And other people too, who are awesome. But it was so good. It was really cool because when we lived in Dublin, we used to go to plays. Like not super regularly, but reasonably regularly. And I haven't had, like coinciding, I think, with, you know, becoming a professor and then having small children. Sure. I haven't gone to a play in years. And I kind of forget that it's this whole other medium and it's not just like television but live, like it's just completely different. So watching that video was super cool. It's Streetcar Named Desire is not a laugh riot, like it's super intense, so we had to watch it in small chunks over a few evenings, but it was just kind of a cool thing to do that obviously we would never have been able to go to the theatre in London, so that was really cool. It was a cool thing that we got to do.
That's awesome.
Yes.
How neat.
Yeah.
So you make me remember that I subscribed to the American Ballet Theatre email list, and they send little notices like they're doing, you know, because they can't do live performances right now, but they've been doing really cool performances where they show old footage and then they have somebody right now, like your MC for the evening, talking about it and telling you interesting things, and you get to see all this awesome dancing, really well recorded, available on YouTube, totally easy. So yeah. Really cool. That's a good point.
That is really cool.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, I don't know if it's actually going to happen, but like there's someone that I've been communicating with in Ireland who might do a seminar here. And obviously our department budget would never stretch to flying someone in from Ireland. So like there is silver linings.
That's such a good point.
So yeah. So how was your week apart from the ballet?
Oh, good. So one thing I wanted to talk about was I've been thinking, maybe this is like a plug for a future episode about summer research students. So I have kind of two, but also one who recently graduated and is finishing some things up. And so I have three. And so I guess what I've been interested to think about is the pros and cons, or the benefits of doing it all these different ways, such as putting them all on the same project, or like, does that equal finishing the project really quickly and then you can do a different one? Or is it better if they all have their separate ones and have a little more autonomy? Or is it good if they can talk with each other? So it's just really interesting to consider all the different attributes of separate projects or the same project, or helping each other but having one lead. Like, you know, there's so many different ways of doing it. And for a summer research student, which is just like 10 weeks, there's not that much time. So it's just, I've been interested to think about how to set that up.
That is interesting. And I'm super into doing an episode of that. And then, especially if you could tell me what the right answer is. Well, because I have three.
I'll have a little more information in a couple weeks about what worked perfect. And what didn't.
That would be wonderful. Yeah. Sorry, you're always the one I'm like, find out if they're going to get arrested at the conference trip you did or whatever it is. And so, yeah. Okay, tell me, so should we talk a little bit about what we mean by Headspace?
Yes, and let's do that before the quote, I think. So what do you think of?
Oh, shoot, I forgot about this.
Headspace.
Headspace for me is sort of like the frame of mind that you carry into this job. And I am definitely susceptible to falling into like a negative headspace. And so definitely, yeah, kind of just consciousness about your headspace and where you're at
Totally.
with your frame of
I love
mind.
it.
Yeah.
I have nothing to add. I feel like that's exactly what I feel.
Yes. Okay. So sorry, tell me your quote. I'm excited to hear your quote.
Okay, so I have a quote. I kind of cheated because I have two quotes, but they're from the same person. And the person is, I definitely qualifies as a mentor, not a professor. It's Tony Robbins. Do you know Tony Robbins?
I know the name for sure.
Uh-huh.
But I don't even know why I know his name.
Totally. Well, he has all these resources on improving yourself in like whatever way you want to improve yourself. So anyway, he talked about, well, the quotes. So I have two quotes, like I said, because I cheated. So one of them is, "The way you move determines the way you feel." And the other one is, "You get a second chance every second." And both of those just, I don't know, really spoke to me with Headspace. Because it is true that when I start to get down, if I just consciously move the way I would move if I wasn't feeling down, I feel less down.
Oh,
you know?
yeah.
And I also really get some motivation with this second chance every second thing. Just because I'm down right now doesn't mean I have to be down next second, you know? Because it's so easy to feel like, well, this is just the state I'm in, and I'll be in this state indefinitely. But it's nice to know that there is some power, lots of power, and that you can change it.
Yes, and I heard this definition of despair, and I cannot remember where I heard it, and maybe in the future I will come back and correct this and attribute it to who it is. But it was someone saying, like, despair is believing that tomorrow is going to be exactly like today.
Ooh,
and
yes.
I was like, whoa, like that is, and like that's what you're saying, right? Like there's no, like, yeah.
Sure.
And
that
that's
makes
super
sense.
crucial, right? Yeah.
Yeah, if you don't feel the power to have any change, then why would you feel excited?
Totally. And I think in general this came up for us about, partly because I get into a really negative headspace at the end of the semester, so that's,
You are not alone.
It's a relevant thing. And then just like how easy in our jobs it is to fall into bitterness.
Yeah.
You know, and when I hear people saying those things, everything they're saying is true.
Yeah.
You know,
totally.
It's not like it's not true, and there is deep frustrations in the kind of work that we do.
Right.
But yeah. And a lot of those are kind of extra magnified at the moment, for sure.
Yeah. Totally. So would you like to start?
Wanna...
Oh, okay.
Oh, sorry. We got each other, but yeah, I don't mind. Yeah, so I think what is working for me, I have a few things.
Okay.
So one is something that we had this like we did a new faculty workshop just when we arrived on campus, like it's kind of your orientation to campus.
Mm-hmm.
And this guy who I've never really known what his name was, and I've never seen him on campus since, so sometimes I'm like, is he real? But he gave this really powerful message about like not falling into bitterness and how like not only will it damage the students, but you'll ultimately like seriously damage yourself.
Ooh.
And even though those things are really true, all of the grumbles everybody has about students, like focusing on them is just poison for you, you know? And so yeah, so I think I definitely really struggle with this, with like kind of getting into that gloomy, despairing headspace. And
totally,
one thing that I did, oh yeah, it's hard. And it's, yeah. So one thing I've started to try and do is draw attention to when I'm grumpy and in that headspace, it's usually an indicator that I'm kind of depleted in some way.
Ooh.
Like, and so like I'm running on empty. Something is like out of what, like it's not, instead of, because sometimes I've gotten into like, well, just snap out of it and stop being a jerk. And like, you know, that's not super helpful and has never worked. But just recognizing like, okay, I'm not normally this grumpy, I'm not normally this negative. So well, maybe I'm negative, but I'm not normally this like bitter. And so maybe it's telling me something about what I need to be doing. And so one thing this semester that I did a little differently, I kind of had an epiphany over the holidays from last year. Because I think I mentioned earlier in the podcast that like I've been having some health issues. That definitely ties into just feeling extra drained and tired. And so
Totally.
I kind of realized that I was feeling this sort of bitterness and like just grump, permanent grump. And so I formed like a women's group that met like once a month or once in a while, and sometimes more frequently online, and just kind of to make my world a little bit bigger. Because I think sometimes when I feel like my only identity is this professor person
Ooh.
and momming, then it's like, I think inherently the interactions that we have with students and kind of with your kids, like, you know, offspring kids, it's always one way, right? Like they can't support you.
Interesting.
That's not their role. And so it is this sort of, you can end up really depleted if it's always going external. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. It's making me think of the captain of the ship. Who does he talk to? Or she, you know?
Right.
Yeah. That's a great point.
Yeah. And so I kind of started having these sort of deliberate interactions just to make, you know, and I remember seeing something like where there's like a pie chart and it was like, you know, if your job is 100% of your life and it's not going great, then it feels like your life is going down the toilet, you know.
Ooh,
But
yeah,
if
yeah,
it's
yeah.
just one portion of your life and it's you're having a crappy week in work, it doesn't mean your life is going completely sideways and there's all these other things. And so, yeah, so I think that has been really helpful, having like deliberate stuff. And this podcast honestly has been like a great source of joy and like something else that we do that isn't, you know, depleting. Like it's definitely, I
Totally.
feel like this is really invigorating and I always feel like energized and excited afterwards. And it's not this kind of just pushing all your energy outwards.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. So finding or creating other aspects. That's really cool.
Yeah, and like that's something I really admire in you, is that you have so many facets to you. You know what I mean? And so many, do you know what I mean? Like deliberate,
Like
like other
music
projects
and
that are in your life. Yeah, and like all of that stuff. And so I think the more of those you have, then one thing doesn't get too loaded. Like if you're
that makes
having a
sense.
day where you're not able to write any of your book,
Right.
that's okay, because that's not your whole
Uh-huh.
identity, right? It's
That's
like
such a good
part of
point.
who you are.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that has been working well. It didn't cure me of the finals week misery, but it is like it's kind of, you know,
That was an
yeah.
extreme
It's
scenario though. So,
yes. But
yeah.
maybe in another year it would have been really bad. So who knows? But what about for you? What's working well for you with headspace and mindset?
Well, one thing that I find really helpful at avoiding overwhelm is to very deliberately just do one thing at a time. And I think I might have mentioned this previously on podcast that, you know, if you are doing a couple things at a time, maybe that's not overwhelming. But then if something goes wrong with one or an email comes in or you get interrupted, suddenly it's too many things and that's overwhelming. Or if you're trying to do a couple things at once, you're feeling pulled to a third one. So anyway, the one thing at a time has really been helpful. And what I've been doing recently, which has been really cool, I think, is I have reminders on my phone. And so at 9 a.m., a reminder comes on that says positive, focused, and enthusiastic. Those are the traits I'm trying to be, you know? And then at
Oh,
10 a.m.,
wow.
it says one thing at a time. And then at 11, it says positive, focused, enthusiastic again. So I just, you know, I just swipe them away, but it's a little reminder, hey, these are the things you're trying to do. Especially in the morning when, you know, I'm getting on the trajectory for the day. I've been finding that really effective.
That sounds awesome. And I think that harkens back to something we talked about before about like these things being a practice. And you can't
Yes,
just say, I have a positive mindset. That's just who I am. Like it has to be this constant, like, okay, come back over here to, you know, I can't remember the words you said, positive,
totally.
I
Positive,
can't remember the
focused,
rest of them. But
enthusiastic. Those are my three.
yes,
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was really funny. The other day I was taking a virtual dance class and there was a pause, where the teacher was going to turn on the music or something. And I was like, oh, I'll just check my email, which is totally not one thing at a time,
I know.
But then
I do the same thing.
I know. But then I saw that my reminder on my phone was literally about to go off that said one thing at a time. And I was like, I really should not try to squeeze because I'm trying to not, so anyway, it is helpful.
That's past Claire saving future Claire right there.
I know. Yeah. So I'm totally into the reminders popping up because, it's kind of the same thing as putting a Post-it somewhere in your office that your eyes fall on to remind you of the thing you're working on. I like this because I have to look at it. The phone vibrates. You're like, stop. Yeah.
Yeah, I like it. But yeah, dude, I've done the same thing with like being in a meeting.
Oh, yeah.
And then just like getting drawn up to the email and oh man, it's not effective.
Yeah.
And, I think we definitely have talked about this before, but like I have this dangerous thing I do with email on my phone, especially with the kids at the moment, where I kind of look at something and I think I've dealt with it in some way when I just haven't. Like if I could sit down and be like, I am dealing with email right now,
then I could
intentionally, right, and just kind of half focusing on things is really, just creates chaos and workload.
And then it hangs over you. You saw it, you haven't dealt with it yet. I mean, if you remember, you haven't dealt with it yet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally.
So what about you?
Yeah, so I've written down on my list, like, remembering all the stuff I said up at the other bit. So, like, actually remembering those things and
totally
doing that is, because, like we said, it's a practice and you have to keep, like, my natural inclination is rolling down the hill into doom. That's what I've written here, and it's really true. It's like, and I feel like, with the slightest, like, if I let go of things just 1 minute, which is also part of my, I think I see things in kind of extremes like that. And so part of me, even with how like I'm approaching things, like having all these different projects, it's like, oh my God, if one thing slips, but like back to what you said at the beginning, like every second you have a second chance and you can come back, so it's not as extreme. And I think the biggest issue I have with all of this stuff is compassion. And like, if I'm thinking jerky things about other people, it's usually because I'm being really wretched to myself. Like if I'm...
That's a good point.
Yeah. And so I think it kind of comes back to, instead of like berating myself, but just recognizing like, you're tired. You need to take a break and do some yoga, or you need to, but kind of instead I can get into really negative self-talk of like, you shouldn't feel tired. You should be able to, and it's just so pointless. And yeah, so I think compassion is my struggle, like self-compassion and not kind of getting frustrated with myself. And then, I read a really good quote years ago. Maybe it was Harriet Lerner. I can't remember, but it was about anger. And it was like, especially women, but everybody is sort of taught like anger is a bad thing, but it can usually be a really helpful indicator, like, hey, like someone is kind of, you're getting trodden on here, or something is happening that's going against. And I kind of feel like with me, like the bitterness and grumpiness is a really good indicator that I'm not being nice to myself. And yeah.
So you're at the point where you're aware that that's an indicator, but it takes a while for you to be able to say, oh, therefore I need to be compassionate to myself.
Totally. Yeah.
Interesting.
And so, yeah, because it's like with the kids, when it's so clear with them, when they just start losing their minds and melting down, it's like, oh, okay, you need a snack. Let's sit down, or you need a cuddle, or, it's never like, just get yourself together and stop being a jerk. Like, I mean, sometimes it has been, but like, you can just see so plainly, like, you're tired. You need to go, but it's so hard with yourself to kind of recognize those things.
That's so true.
So, yeah.
I wonder how you can leave yourself reminders that that's the likely cause, that you need a snack or something.
Yeah. Back to Lupin and his chocolate. Like, that's what you need. Yeah.
I have noticed in the past where I would get home from work, and if I wasn't feeling good, it would usually be a day where I hadn't eaten enough. And I was like, oh,
Yeah.
I need to be sure to eat enough, which makes sense, but I didn't connect it to the emotions at first.
I know. And it's really funny because sometimes though Eric will be like, are you hungry? And I'm like, that is not what this is. How dare you? This is like, and then like you eat something and you're like, that might have been what this was, but never like, and it's just like really like, I'm like, I am having a complex emotional reaction. It's not because I'm hungry. It could be because I'm hungry. So yeah.
Oh, man.
Yeah. Yeah. We're not monuments to justice or reason, but yeah.
Totally.
So tell me, what are you working on?
I'm working on being in the present moment. And this is something I've been working on for a long time, and I'm still definitely working on it. I feel like, so if I don't actively avoid it, I'm constantly lining up ducks in the back of my mind, and thinking about all these different things, and usually about the future, usually the near future of all the things that I'm trying to get lined up. And I find that it's an extra challenge for me because it's all in my mind. I'm not really sure what I can do not in my mind, out physically, to make it easier. So that's kind of a challenge. So I'm in the market for systems to help me be comfortable, setting the work aside and not worrying that it's going to fall into little pieces as soon as I stop thinking about it,
I know.
Like, I know that it won't fall to pieces if I stop thinking about it, but I also feel like, how am I going to remember that I need to do these 5 things? And I know that I go write them down, but then there's the next 5 things, or like the way that I should write that email, So like, I'm trying to figure out what system I can employ to let me be fully comfortable, setting all that aside and just not worrying about it, just focusing on whatever I am doing at the moment.
Oh, dude. Like you're singing my song. Like this, because that's how my anxiety manifests is like planning. Like I sort of believe if I can just ruminate on every single possible thing that could happen, and it never works because then something else always comes along that I wasn't prepared for, and I did all the math and it's still everything is But yeah, it's so hard, and it's such an old tactic for me to just kind of constantly be thinking about these things.
Yeah. I think one of the things is that I still believe it works, I haven't quite...
This is the delusion, right? Because if you really knew... Like, that's the thing, you're like, if it's like, you're like trying to be this supercomputer, like, you're like, no, but if I could just get the calculations right, like, I could predict everything, including the weather. Yeah, I know.
Yeah. And I do feel like there are occasions where having thought about stuff in advance allows me to respond appropriately with less thought when the situation does come up. But that doesn't seem like it necessitates coming up with contingency plans for every possible scenario,
right.
It's not really a practical solution.
No. I mean, you are very smart, but still... You are not the supercomputer that can come up with the universe.
Exactly.
So do you have moments though? Because I definitely have moments where I'm not in that headspace, and I don't totally understand the mechanism of But do you have that sometimes where you're like just living carefree and?
Yes, Tony Robbins, the quote guy, would say that you should try to, when you're in that state, or if you can get yourself in that state, you should try to make some kind of trigger for yourself to get back into that state later when you want to. Like if you're in the state, or you can get yourself to be in the state, then you could like tap your finger in some strange way.
It would remind you.
If you do that enough, it would remind you later.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. That's a thing to try.
What's really coming up for me, and I don't know why you do it. Like I know some of the reasons I do it, and like for me it was definitely like a young response that I kind of learned, that like in stressful situations, like if you just think everything through, and I don't think it worked then, but I believed it did anyway. And so that was, but like for me the biggest thing it just comes up is soothing, like because even though to me when I'm in that space, it feels like I'm being Captain Rational, but I'm not. Like, I'm really like, I'm panicking. I'm like feeling
I see.
like deeply unsafe and stressed and anxious, and that's why I do it. I don't know if that's true for you, but I wish, obviously I'm not going to do this, but I sort of wish I could lend you one of my children, because she is very like this. And when she's doing it,
yeah.
you're so clearly like, it's time to go to sleep. We don't need to talk about this right now. It's fine. We're going to deal with it tomorrow and everything's okay. And I feel like when you have the experience of saying that to her, you're like, oh yeah, this is true. We will take care of it tomorrow. It's not necessary for me to run through these 5,000 things.
Totally. Yeah.
And
and that seems like it fits with a just write down your concern so you are confident you'll remember it if you need to, and then put it out of your head.
Yeah. Like, the thing with you is that you are like so infinitely capable. It sort of blows my mind that you feel like you need to do this, because it's like, but you never forget things and you always like, so yeah.
But maybe that's why.
It's not, but I hear you.
You're right. I agree with you. I just need to convince myself.
I know, dude. It's a hard thing to give up, because you're like, oh no, now I have to do it more so that people continue to think that I'm really capable. And
I know. Gosh, dude, how funny.
I know, but I don't know.
This has given me lots of good thoughts.
Well, what is soothing for you? What's a soothing?
What is soothing?
Mm-hmm.
I love to read novels. That's very soothing. And also to bake. Those are my two, like, I'm totally having a good old me time moment.
Jeez, Claire, like, every time I talk to you, I'm like, okay, now I know everything there is to know about Claire. Just like, and then you're like, oh, no, there's another thing. That's super cool.
Yeah. What's your soothing thing?
Oh, my soothing thing is always knitting. Like, knitting, I can't meditate because my brain just will not cooperate with that. But I kind of go into whatever happens with meditation when I knit.
Yeah. That makes sense. I can see that.
Yeah.
It's the same pattern you're seeing over and over again with your hands. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. And it's always like, I'm like, this isn't going to work. And then like 50 rows later, you're like, it totally worked. And here I am, like, just kind of spaced out. And,
that's good to know.
Yeah, that is my soothing thing.
Well, thanks so much. This has been really good to think about and really get specific about. I think that's been helpful.
It is. It's really good, because I think when this first came up, I was like, well, I'm not good. I kind of didn't recognize that I do have things that I do that are like positive.
Totally.
Things that actually can change your mind or change your headspace.
And it's so helpful to be aware of them consciously, so that you can choose to use them rather than just wait for them to magically happen.
Totally. Yeah, totally. Because, I mean, that's the thing. I think part of my talking about rolling down the hill into doom is being like powerless to all of this. Like, there's no... Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's definitely a crummy feeling. Well, thank you, Claire. As always, this reflection process is bringing things up that I didn't even know I thought until I wrote them down.
I know.
Yeah, so it's good.
Me too. Yeah, thanks a lot, Ruth.
Thank you. And thanks always to Ralph. Thanks so much for joining us on the Professor Podcast with Ruth and Claire. We're delighted to have you as a listener, and we would love to hear from you. And if you want to email us, our address is contactprofessorpodcast@gmail.com. We'd love to hear any of your suggestions for future shows, or professor quotes that you might want to share with us, or even just things that have come up for you when you were listening to previous episodes. And if you've been enjoying the podcast, we would love if you would spread the word. So the best way to spread word is by telling people if you think they should listen to it, or you can leave us a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. Thanks so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time.